It doesn't even fit in frame. Oh my god. There's more on top, trust me. And I didn't even stack everything that I needed to. I also have that whole shelf of Carl that I read, and that is not included in this stack. I am sweating after that. And it all fell over, so it wasn't even worth it. Hello and welcome back to Ten's TBR. I'm Kristen. So I read 75 books this year. It is currently December 29th. I will not be finishing any more books specifically because I have read 75 books exactly. I like to end on a nice number divisible by 5 typically. And I will have another video going through all of my specific stats. Those will be actually on my podcast that I do with my best friend Mariah, Literary Liberation. That'll be linked below. And since this is the most books I've ever read this year, I want to attribute this to I listened to a lot of audiobooks this year. Not like a lot, I can pop up the graph here, but significantly more than I have ever listened to in the past, and I do think that helped a lot. And I also found the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. Those I did not pull out because, oh my god, the shelf I already have is perfect. I'll insert a photo, and I don't want to disturb it too much. But, I mean, that's 7 books right there that I ended up finishing this year. But yeah, so I did read a lot, and because of that, I'm worried this video is going to be very long, so I will only be giving the most rudimentary breakdowns of these books. I'm telling you 1 to 2 sentences, that's it, of what it's about, and then 1 to 2 sentences of whether or not I recommend it or not. This is going to be, I imagine, a very long video because I do have a lot of stuff to talk about, and I like to yap, so I am going to try to not do that as much. Who knows how long this video ends up being. This is my first time doing this in a long time, so we'll see how this goes. I also am planning on doing my 10 favorites and my 10 least favorites in their own video, probably to be posted in the next couple weeks as well. So those books I will go more in depth in that video. If you're really interested in what my favorites or least favorites were, I will give a much more in-depth synopsis, whether or not I recommend them or don't recommend them. Other than that, let's get right into it. So the first book I actually read this year was Radium Girls by Kate Moore. I listened to that on audiobook. I kind of liked it. I didn't necessarily love it. I recommended it to my grandma and she loved it. Basically, all that it talks about is the history of during World War I, there were women working in dangerous factories and conditions. Talks about their fights for justice because of when they were working in those radium factories. It was obviously very dangerous because we know now that radium is actually a very deadly chemical, and these women were ingesting it and breathing through it without a mask or anything like that. And it talks about all of that throughout it. I enjoyed it. Yes, I listened to the audiobook, and I remember I actually started it in 2024. And it took me like 4 or 5 months to finish it. So it wasn't like my favorite read. It is very long and does get a little bit redundant. If you don't know anything about it, yes, but maybe it's not going to be life-changing, I would say. The next book I read was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This was my second V.E. Schwab book, I think. I want to say ever, because I read Gallant a couple years ago. But this book has you following 2 main characters through a dual point of view. You have present timeline and past timeline, and you have the timeline where it's after Victor has escaped from prison, and the before timeline is Victor and Eli in college, best friends, and turns out it looks like Eli was partially a bit responsible for why Victor is in prison, while also these people were able to develop superpowers in a way without really knowing how that's done. I think if you're a fan of the OA, if you're a fan of X-Men, you will love this. I give it 4.5 stars. I really did eat this up. One of my favorite books this year, Dead At. Like, this will be on my top 10, I think, this year. I really enjoyed this. And there's the 3rd one coming out in 2026. I will be reading. Thank you. The next book I ended up reading this year was The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. That is a very philosophical read if you're into that. You follow a character named Shevek, who's from a utopian, anarchist moon, utopian quote unquote, but it's also suffering from extreme poverty, while their neighboring moon is a capitalist society, and they have a lot of luxury goods and wealth and things like that. And you follow another dual timeline book where you're following him as he's growing up on a rare risk, while also he is living in the capitalist moon Uranus. It's a very big character study, and then also like showing the differences between like a capitalist and anarchist society. And I didn't love this book. This is a very unpopular opinion, might be a very hot take. Sue me, sorry. I prefer books that are a little bit more plot focused. This is not very much plot centered. There is a bit of a mystery on your following why Shevek would leave this beautiful great moon, if everything's so great and happy, to go live on this capitalist moon if it's not so great and happy. And I think if it was a nonfiction book comparing capitalist and anarchist society, I probably would have vibed with it more. I just don't like that in my fiction books typically. I really enjoyed the politics of it, and I thought it was a very confusing read, personally. I didn't like the writing style. I didn't gel with it. And it is classic, and it feels like a classic. And I think this would be for a certain reader, but not for me personally. The next book I read was Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. I actually just picked up this hardback copy from my used bookstore. I don't want to spoil Vicious if you haven't read it, but this is following new characters and new stories somewhat. I say if you love the first book, then you should definitely read this one. However, this one is nowhere near as good as the first one. It's good still, and I would still recommend it in a way, but only if you loved the first one. I think the first one works really well as a standalone, and yes, I'm excited for the third one, but also you could live without this, I think personally, but it is still good. And you still do get a lot of the stuff that you would like. If you are obsessed with the first one, this one just kind of didn't hit the same highs as Vicious did. But this one is I'd still recommend it. If you really enjoyed Vicious. If you didn't like Vicious, then don't pick this up. There's no reason to. Everything can get squared away if you pretend the first book is a standalone, honestly. The next book I read was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I have already read this series before. It was a reread this year for me. I don't know if you even need a synopsis of this book. I mean, this book is already so incredibly popular. But if you don't know, basically it's post-America and they're forced to fight in a battle royale style game. One person wins and that person is showered with goods and great things. And you follow Katniss, who is volunteering for her sister who has been picked for this death game. I read this because I wanted to prepare for the new Hunger Games coming out, The Sunrise and the Reaping, which I was going to do a reread of the whole series, but then I read this one. I was like, actually, I really don't need to do that because I actually read these. I think I read all three of them in 2024, so I was like, it's kind of redundant. I remember all the main plot points, but I still did enjoy this. Obviously, I do recommend this read. I think if you've never read them, or even if you've only seen the movies, the books are still well worth a read. I did review this on my podcast with Mariah, so that'll be linked below if you want to check out my full thoughts and opinions on this. It does have great commentary, though. The next book I read this year was then The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, but this is Toni Morrison's debut novel that follows Pecola Breedlove, a young girl who prays for blue eyes. She wants to be beautiful like the other children within her neighborhood and the other white kids at school. And I think this is one of those books where I understand why it's a classic. It should be required reading for literally everyone. This was my first Toni Morrison novel, and it was so important, eye-opening. The way Toni Morrison writes, I can't even properly describe it because it's so poetic, but while also being incredibly beautifully descriptive. I really enjoyed her writing style, and I can't wait to read more of her work next year. It really does show the important commentary about society and how children are affected by racism within our society, and how even if you try to shelter your child from these harms of this world, they will still experience harm. It is a really beautifully written novel. It is a very heavy, heavy, heavy book. Emphasis on heavy. There's a lot going on within it. I would recommend checking your trigger warnings. It is such an important read. I think if you don't read anything from this list, this should be one that you should read if you've never read it before. The next book I read this year was The Teacher by Freida McFadden. This book is a multi-point of view book that follows the teacher and a student. The thing about this book is, I've read a couple of other Freida McFadden books. I read the Housemaid series, and I think that's it. And those are fine. They weren't the worst things in the world, but I did not say I necessarily love them or would recommend them, unless you're a very specific reader. However, This book was probably one of the worst things I've ever read in my entire life. I hated this book. The plot is children's assault without even making any type of social commentary. Like, you read The Bluest Eye, and that actually has, like, social commentary about, like, what is going on within the world, while this is just, like, writing this child being abused just for, like, a plot purpose, not even to, like, say anything about it. The writing was god-awful. Not to mention incredibly boring for it to be such a insane topic to be writing about. We ended up reviewing this on the podcast. The next book I read was Thrum by Meg Nitherman. This book is a maybe. It is a short story. It's only like 130-ish pages or so, but you follow Amy, who wakes up years later from her stasis with no memory, and she's the only surviving member of her crew. She's sending out a distress signal, and then basically she's about to get rescued by a mysterious, handsome alien. It's a short story. I don't necessarily love short stories. I maybe would have vibed with it more if it was a full-length novel. I don't think it was necessarily anything that, like, I would write home about. I wouldn't say it's super memorable. Like, I remember a couple things, but not like it's ingrained in my brain. It could be a great filler book if you're looking for something easy in between reading stuff. And I feel like it kind of gives like a one-off Doctor Who episode, where, like, one episode where, like, the Doctor is not the main character, where he kind of shows up just at the end. That's kind of, like, the vibe that I got from it. So it's, like, cute, but it's not, like, life-changing. So the next book I read was Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I've already ranted and raved about this book on my channel, but so, like, if you don't know, but this book follows Bree, a 16-year-old girl who just lost her mother, and she just got accepted into, like, an early college program, and whenever she's there, she kind of sees something she isn't supposed to see, but then she also kind of thinks that maybe it's related to her mom's death. What she sees is related to, like, King Arthur's court, where there's, like, a secret society, so it's kind of, like, mysterious in that way. This was my favorite book in the series. I adore this book. I picked it up because everybody and their mothers were talking about Oathbound coming out, so I was like, yeah, I need to read this series, which I kind of regret now, because who knows how long until this series is finished, which, like, I don't regret it, obviously. I love this book. I do recommend the series, especially if you like Percy Jackson as a kid growing up. This feels like the next step above Percy Jackson. It's YA, but it doesn't feel super young in that way. It does feel like more of like a teen, like an actual teen novel, which I could talk about, like, the death of teen literature all over, while this feels like genuinely very teen, which is very nice. I love a good YA book. Highly recommend. Definitely read. The next book I read was Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis. This is literally, like, it's like 100 and something pages. 115 pages, short informational novel about the current prison system and the critiques of it. I think this one was published in like 2003, and I gave this book 5 stars. It's a very informative read. It's a very good read. Highly recommended. It is so easy. The way Angela Davis is able to write such clear and concise ways of her argument. I think the audiobook for this is literally like 5 hours. You put that in 2 times speed, that's like 2.5 hours, the length of a movie. It's incredibly worth the read and the listen. I learned so much about this. Davis has such a great analysis and facts about how the carceral program is currently for profit rather than for actually rehabilitating people into society properly. And it's got a lot of great critiques and ways that could possibly be done within our society. I do think this is another one that should be like required reading for literally everyone. The next book I read, which honestly pairs very well with Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis, is Chain Gang All-Stars. So this book, in a not so distant future, America now makes a reality show out of prisoners. They're able to compete and kill for their own freedom. You follow Thurwar and Stax, who are teammates and lovers, and their journey as Thurwar only has a couple more matches until her freedom. It is a very interesting read. I think this is one of the most educational fiction books I've ever read. It is kind of similar to the way Babel is, where it has footnotes in that way. This also does have footnotes, but these ones have very educational footnotes that actually relate and give you actual education about real world events that have happened within especially the United States. It has great critique of capitalism, a great critique of systematic racism, the prison system. It's such a great, well-rounded read. I think this is a must-read fiction book as well for everyone. I read this with our book club on Fable, and we did a podcast episode about this. The next books I read was Bloodmark by Tracy Deonn. This is, again, the second book in the series, so I will not be spoiling it or giving you a synopsis about this, but I did like this one. The think the first one's better. I didn't love this one like I loved the first one. Originally, the series was supposed to be a trilogy, but then it's been expanded out into 5 books, maybe, I want to say. But this book, it just is a lot of exposition, a lot of build up and stuff, which I still, again, I really like the characters, and that's what really pulls me through this. But I almost think that maybe this should have stayed a trilogy, personally. But I do still really enjoy this, and I think if you like Legendborn, you're going to like these. It's got all of the characters you love from Legendborn. But again, I wish it was a trilogy. I think it would have been a perfect trilogy. The next book I read was Mickey 17. It's technically Mickey 7, I guess, but they changed the name to Mickey 17 for the movie, but whatever. By Edward Ashton. Mickey, I love this book, first of all, but Mickey is in Expendable. He's the 7th iteration of this Mickey. The humans are sent to colonize another planet, which is dangerous work, and instead of sending a human, they send Mickey, who is just like a copied and paste version of himself. They can just print him out a new body anytime his body goes kaput, but then Mickey 7 goes missing, and so they kind of a little bit prematurely end up printing out Mickey 8, which is not needed because then Mickey 7 shows up. They don't allow duplicates. So, you kind of follow that adventure of Mickey 7 trying to coexist with Mickey 8, and then also a few other things throughout this. I did really enjoy this. I like the movie as well. I like them the same, even though the book and the movie are honestly completely different. Like, the only thing that's kind of the same is the premise, but it's they make a lot of things definitely more extreme, and the commentary is a lot more relevant to modern times, I would say, versus what goes on in this book, which I can appreciate, but then also I did like some of the things better in this. I did really like this, and I do recommend it, especially if you like the movie. I have not read the sequel, and I don't know if I'll read the sequel, because I honestly felt like this wrapped up in a nice little bow, where, again, I don't want another, like, vicious, vengeful catastrophe. It's not a catastrophe, it's fine. And I'm sure I would like the second one, but it's just, like, I have so many other stuff I want to read. But this one definitely, I think, is worth it, especially if you like the movie. The next book I read was The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. Clementine moves into her late aunt's apartment, and she discovers that everything is as it seems. A strange man appears in her kitchen, saying that her aunt is allowing him to stay there for the summer, while he's moving to New York and becoming a world-famous chef, but it turns out that he's actually living, 7 years in the past? Oh yeah, the 7-Year Slip. He's living 7 years in the past while she's living 7 years in the future. It's a very unique romance novel. I'm not a big romance reader, but I did really enjoy this one because I do think it has a lot to do with the growth of Clementine and her dealing with her own grief and stuff, where it's not just a set on, like, how do these people get together sort of vibe. It is got a little bit of other things going on. I think this is the like, it kind of reminds me of, like, an Emily Henry-esque without being an Emily Henry, in a way. I did really enjoy this. I thought the premise was really unique, and it was very cute, and I actually did tear up a smidge reading this. It was a little corny, but I still really liked it. The next book I read was Educated by Tara Westover. This is a memoir about Tara, whose family is, like, big conspiracy theorists, like Mormon survivalists type of people. They were like, public schools, the root of all evil. The government's going to, like, take them out for what they believe. They think doctors are liberal hippies there to inject you with trackers, vaccines. And with a lack of formal education, Tara begins educating herself, and then she's able to leave this abusive situation and family to go to BYU, I think it is, and you kind of follow her life and her journey. But I did think it was a really interesting read. This was one of those ones that, like, it feels like fiction, even though it's, like, a memoir. This lady's life is kind of so crazy, and, like, her family kind of wackadoodles, kind of sad. I really enjoyed this. I do think you should read it if you've never read it before. The next book I read was Eileen by Otesha Moshfegh. So Eileen is sad, unlikable, hates her job at a private juvenile detention center. She hates her dad, and then she ends up making herself disappear from her life. I don't really have that much to say about this book. Well, I have a lot to say because I freaking hated this book. I do not recommend this. This is my second Otesha Moshfegh book. I remember I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation. That was fine. I didn't love it. It is what it is, you know? But this one is God, it was so boring. I'm sorry. Like, the writing style is incredibly dull. I know Atisha Moshfegh writes characters that are supposed to be, like, unlikable and boring and, like, weird girl. And it's like, they just feel so incredibly forced to me. Where it's like, okay, we get it. You're different. You're not like other girls. These characters have no redeeming qualities, not one at all. I think Eileen tries to be subversive in a lot of ways, but then it just falls flat. I watched the movie after reading this, and this is one of the times where I actually do think the movie was better than the book, because you would not be dedicating however long it takes you to read Eileen, which would be probably at least 8 hours, maybe 5 hours at the minimum, versus watching I think it's only an hour and a half movie, which is, thank God, watching that and you get quite literally the same exact story. It's a very accurate adaptation without it being so extreme. The ending, like, that was fine, I guess. It wasn't the best thing ever, but it was interesting somewhat. But again, it is a very disappointing read. I did read this with my book club, and I did a full review on my podcast. The next book that I read was Oathbound by Tracy Deonn. Again, no spoilers. I really did like this book. It's not as good. Not even as the second one, it's not as good as the first one. This got a lot of fluff in it. It is very long. I'm just really hoping it's worth it, because I just think this one is very dragged out, and I really, like, this is the one where it's the most obvious, where this just feels like the middle of a book, where you're just waiting for the finale to happen. We're waiting for the ending to happen. And that frustrates me, but I do think the ending of this was very good. It really pulls it back in, but it's just like the in-between stuff. I'm like, we need to get this show on the road. Thank you. I need the finale now. Like, finish this up so I could decide whether or not this is the perfect series or just an okay series. I do think I can tell the ending is going to be strong. Tracy Deonn does have a really good writing style. It's just, there's so much extra stuff going on that you can almost tell that it's not been fully planned out in the way that I originally think it should have been, or was, before it got dragged out more. And this one does, I feel like the romance is getting more focused on, and personally, I don't care. Like, I like a romance, but obviously, as you can see what I've read so far, how many of them have actually been romance? I don't need as much romance as I want the plot. The next book I read was Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. Again, I was preparing myself to read this because I was very excited. One of my anticipated reads of this year. This is the 5th book released in the Hunger Games, while it's also being a prequel. It's following the 50th games, which is Katniss's mentor, Haymitch, his games and his survival. It's a quarter quell, and the twist is there's double the tributes. Rather than just being one boy and one girl from the 12 districts, it is 2 boys and 2 girls from each of the districts. So they have like 50 people almost in this. It is a really great series. I do really enjoy this. I think if you like the Hunger Games, you will love this. Obviously, like, come on. The movie looks fire. The teaser trailer has come out. Very excited. Looks like a very accurate adaptation. I like that what you think you know, like, from the original trilogy, this is kind of proved wrong because of the way that propaganda and different things are discussed in the world. It's really good. I do recommend it. Definitely worth the read. The next book I read was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is my first Andy Weir novel, and I think I definitely want to check out more of his books because this is literally like one of my favorite books of this year. Basically, I would say, like, genuinely don't know anything about this book. Go in as blind as possible. Like, you do not need to know any information about this book. Just literally trust me, Bo, pick up and read it. If you haven't already, which I feel like most people have because this is being made into a movie next year. So excited. I've heard great things about the audiobook. Have not listened to it. I physically read it and I loved it. If you have to know something, all it is, a man wakes up in space. His whole crew is dead. He's the only one there and he doesn't know who he is, how he got there, what's going on. That's it. That's all you need to know. I'm telling you, you will thank me so much if you know nothing about it. It is a bit sciencey. I think the sciencey is not too bad. It might go over your head in some aspects, but I'm telling you, you don't need to be all over it. Really, you could just ding a little bit, and I think you'll be fine. I really enjoyed this. I recommend this to people who don't read and they loved it, but I think like the vibe of this book will literally be like the Superman summer of 2025. The way that movie was, it got people back in the theater. People loved it. Everybody on Twitter was talking about it. I think Project Hail Mary has that aspect of it while being a little bit different. Obviously, it's not following the same, like, subject matter, but I do think that this could have that same vibe, like the happiness and the greatness of humanity. That vibe is in this, and I love it. The next book that I read was actually The Maid by Nita Prose. This is a cozy thriller following Molly the Maid, who is a neurodivergent woman dealing with the loss of her grandmother, who is the only person who ever fully understood her. Molly ends up discovering a dead body in one of the rooms she cleans. This book, the autism representation felt like a caricature. It was not very good. It felt really corny at times. I think the stakes are non-existent, which, I mean, yes, is a cozy mystery, which maybe cozy mysteries are not for me. Oops, sorry. It was so boring. The mystery was not even that intriguing. And honestly, I don't even remember that much about what even happened, like the ending or anything. It's supposed to be a series. Don't know how. I don't think thrillers should be cozy. I think with cozy, it makes it a synonym for boring. I don't enjoy a lot of like cozy fantasy, cozy thrillers. Like, that might be a me thing, but it genuinely was not something I was vibing with. We read this on the podcast, and there's a full spoiler review over there if that's what you're into. The next book I read was I Survived Capitalism, and All I Got Was a Lousy T-Shirt by Madeline Pendleton. This is a memoir following the famed TikTok star, Madeline Pendleton. It follows her growing up in poverty, and then her life throughout as she's able to grow up and survive the economic system we live in, capitalism. Overall, I think, yes, this is something I think most people should read. I think it's a very accessible critique of capitalism that maybe not, if you don't know a lot about like what specific capitalism is or like economic theory in general, this is a very accessible way for people to understand that, like, hey, a lot of like the middle class and like working people are suffering right now under this current economic system, and what are things that you can do about it personally to help yourself, like, basically try to gain the system, because that's all we can really do in the society. It gives you a lot of real life tips about, like, how to buy a house, how to do blah, blah, blah. Like, it's very helpful in that way. It feels like a genuine, like, self-help book that actually gives you, like, lessons that can help you. Also, while talking about Madeline's life and her growing up throughout, which I thought was interesting because I do follow her on TikTok. And I think if other people follow her on TikTok and like her clothing and stuff like that, talks about her business, I think that makes it worth the read. The next book I read was Sky Daddy by Kate Folk. I don't know what to say about this without like being too weird, but it's literally just about like a woman. It's the plane fucker book. It's literally the book about the lady that wants to have sex with planes. That's kind of all you need to know about going into reading this. Like, that's not it though. That's the thing, is that I ended up loving this, which I kind of was reading it ironically. I got an ARC for it actually. And then I ended up buying a physical copy because I enjoyed it so much. I kind of just thought it was going to be like, oh, one of those silly romance books about, like, you know, just like the weird sentient object romance books. This was not that. It's got a lot of talking about like friendships with women and like a bunch of other stuff. I don't know. It was really, it was honestly so touching, and like, I don't want to spoil anything about it. You hear this book and you hear what it's about and you think, oh, but really it's like, oh, and that's all I can say about this. But I'm telling you, like, if you've ever like looked at this and thought, that's what a crazy perspective of a book. It is crazy, but it's so worth it. And genuinely, like, I feel like I thought it was going to be one thing and it really wasn't. It was genuinely like such a touching read. You need to read this. Read this one. Of all things to read, this is the one to read, I'm telling you. The next book I read was Page Boy by Elliot Page, which is just following the life and the rise to stardom of famous actor Elliot Page. I'd say it's, yes, worth the read, especially if you like Elliot Page's acting, because he does talk about like the different movies and the different sets he's on and different things about it. Check your trigger warnings, but Juno is literally one of my all-time favorite movies. I loved the first 3 seasons of The Umbrella Academy, and I just thought this was really great insight about like the horrors of Hollywood, while also you can see why somebody continues to stay in this horrible realm because of the way that acting is such a craft. It is very reflective, and I liked it. I thought it was pretty inspiring. I really enjoy Elliot Page's work, and I do think this is a very good read. The next book I read was Severance by Ling Ma. This book was written before COVID-19. First off, that's a big thing. And we're following Candace, a millennial worker bee, who's only been looking to survive capitalism and live a decent life. So she doesn't notice whenever this plague comes from China that begins taking over the world, and it turns people into like mindless creatures. The premise is very, very good. I was very interested in this. I've heard such good things about this. This is all over Book Talk, like whenever Severance was big earlier this year. These are like books to read if you like Severance. This was recommended as this, even though it's not really like Severance, just in the way that it has the same name. I think this book is incredibly overhyped in a lot of ways. I think the prose is stale. The commentary is lackluster. I think the ending is very unsatisfying. I wanted to like this so much more, and I was left incredibly disappointed with this read. And my book club over on Fable did pick this, and we did do a full review of this on the Literary Liberation podcast. So if you want to know more in-depth thoughts, but I just really don't think it's worth the read. The next book I read was Curse of the Wolf King by Tessonja Odette. This book is a maybe. I was looking for something lighthearted and easy to read. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling with Fae. And apparently there's a whole nother series that is set before this series, so maybe I should have read that before I read this. This book is cute for what it is. Again, it's Beauty and the Beast. I was looking for something really easy. I liked it. It was a slow burn romance, and it wasn't super graphic in the smut, which I personally appreciate. I wouldn't say that it's perfect. It is a bit long for a romance book, in my opinion. It's a little over 400 pages. It is what it is. I think if you like romantasy, you would like this. And Faye, I don't think it's like life-changing, but it's cute. The next book I read was Shark Heart by Emily Haybeck. So you have Ren and Lewis, who are newly married, and they have like a picturesque life. That is until Lewis is diagnosed with turning into a shark disease. What is that? Basically, in this book, it's got a lot of representation for like dementia and things like that are more represented into people turning into different animals. And then they must either, one, go live out in the wild and survive out there because they are wild animals with like the memories of a human, but they're not. This book was honestly so touching. It's really uniquely written. Like, you have some chapters that are literally just like a page long. I think this book is so touching. I was literally crying, like, reading it. Pretty, like, within the first 100 pages, I was already gone. I was bawling. It's heartbreaking. It's dramatic. It's everything that I wanted in a romance. It's not a romance, so I guess a love story is what it is. It's one of the most unique books I've ever read. I think if you're looking for something unique and different than what a typical, like, book is you're reading, this is it. This is something so different and so unique, and I love it. It is a beautiful read. And we did do a full review of this on the podcast. The next book I read was In a Dark Mirror by Kat Davis. This book is a fictional retelling of the Slenderman stabbings. You're getting a dual timeline where you're following one of the girls that committed the stabbing after she is released from her psychiatric ward, while also following the months leading up to the crime. I got this book for free through the Amazon First Reads thing, and I thought I would try it out. Kind of a big mistake, because this book was not very good. It lacks the entirety of nuance and social commentary that I think need to be done. It tries to, like, sensationalize this really traumatic crime that happened, not even, like, in pretty recent memory of most Americans, I would say. Really weird about the way that it discussed, like, mental illness, and that, like, the way that it's done, it's kind of seemed as, like, a mystical, like, disease. It's very odd. I think there's no commentary being done about, like, societally, like, why this would happen, and, like, why, like, crime even happens, which is, like, what I personally look for. Like, a much better, like, alternative to this would be, like, Notes on an Execution by Danya Kakofka. That is something that actually does, like, not taking, like, a specific example either, which this is not specifically Slenderman either. It's just, like, you could see a lot of the parallels where it's got two young girls who make friends with a third girl, and these two young girls end up planning to stab the other girl because of their secret plans or whatever. Some mystical being is telling them that, hey, you should kill this girl or something. Like, it's really weird. It is very graphic, so I would say check trigger warnings, but I don't even think that anybody should pick this up, especially if they love or care about themselves. The next book I read was Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Denneman. If you haven't heard about this book, Where are you? Where have you been? What's going on? Pick this up right now. Basically, all I've been telling anybody is that it's basically the world is taken over by aliens, and Carl is forced to compete in an alien reality show with his ex-girlfriend's talking cat. It sounds crazy. It is crazy. It's incredibly fun. His literally, like, the only options are either you compete on the all 18 floors of this dungeon, or you die on the surface, because that's going to basically get colonized and mined for resources. I think everybody and their mothers should read this book. I think if you ever picked up a controller in your life, or even if you love, like, Dungeons and Dragons, this is going to be for you. I think the average American does not read, like, they don't even read, like, 10 books or they read one book a year. This is the one book that I think, like, genuinely, like, I've recommended quite a few books. This is one of those, like, every year if you're reading a book, like, take one of these, because this one is so good. The entire series, I love. Yeah, literally just, like, pick it up. Like, do you see this display I have for them? This is everything to me. The next book I read was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is another dual timeline book. Wow, I read a lot of dual timeline books this year. I didn't even realize. Where you're following Vanessa while she's in high school and she's getting groomed by her English teacher, while also following the aftermath of that and her as an adult dealing with the trauma. I think this is a really important read for young girls, where, like, I read The Teacher earlier this year, and again, god awful. But this is, like, a much better, like, social commentary and making, like, saying something about, like, victimhood and how we view, like, the perfect victim and different, like, aspects of that are actually, like, being discussed and make you really think about it, versus in The Teacher, it's just sensationalized. I think this is great commentary about, like, the power that men hold in society, especially whenever they're publicly and even privately troubled. And we did a full review of this over on our podcast. The next book I read was All Systems Red by Martha Wells, which is the first Murderbot book. Murderbot is a robot who's hacked himself, so he's no longer a mindless drone forced to do whatever the humans tell him to do. But he doesn't want to get decommissioned, so what does he do? He continues to pretend to be a mindless drone, but then in his off time, he watches soap operas. He hates talking to humans. Specifically, Murderbot gets hired specifically to work on this planet where these people are here to extract resources and test resources on this planet. And it turns out maybe something's out to get them. All the Murderbots are very short. They're all, like, less than 200 pages, I think, or maybe just at 200 pages. Like, they're not very long. I really like this one. I don't think it's perfect for everyone, but I read this because I wanted to watch the show adaptation, which I really like the show. The show felt like a very accurate adaptation while adding in some growth that I think, Murderbot was kind of missing in the original book. I kind of feel like the show was better than the first book. They've already renewed it for season 2. I will be watching that as soon as it's out. The reason why I don't think, like, Murderbot is a perfect 5 stars for me, I did really enjoy it again, but I wish there was more growth for some of the other characters that we are introduced to throughout this year, at least the first book specifically. I like Murderbot's perspective, but I do love a growth in, like, the found family aspects of most other books, and I think this one is just missing that little bit extra. I think Murderbot's perspective is very limited, but I very much enjoy this. I just wish there was a little bit more, and I think the more I read this series, the more I'll be eating it up, gobbling it up. And I think this would be a great read to buff up your reading goal, because again, they're so short. And I think even if it's not for you, I think that just means you ate fun and happiness and laughter and friendliness and everything great in society. The next book I read was Carl's Doomsday Scenario by Matt Denman. I love this book. Again, this is my this isn't my favorite. This is probably my second favorite Carl book. I really enjoyed this. Love Carl. Again, read them. The next book I read was A Treachery of Swans by A.B. Pornick. This is just a sapphic retelling of Swan Lake, which I loved Barbie Swan Lake whenever I was a little girl. And I read this in May, and honestly, the unfortunate part is that I don't think it's very memorable. I really did like the sapphic dynamic that was in it, but I just don't think it's very memorable. The plot isn't very strong. I think it's a lot more like vibes and atmospheric rather than like a fantasy gripping plot. The romance is it's good, it's cute, but it's also not super in there. I think I learned a lot more from this read, but I think somebody else may like it more, and I think the vibes and stuff are immaculate, but I just need more than vibes whenever I'm reading a book, personally. The next book I read was Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism by Kristen Godsey. Don't ask me where the dust jacket of this is. It's gone forever. I'm a chronic dust jacket loser, to be honest. This is a nonfiction book talking about the differences between feminist rights and movements under different socialist states. So versus like the USSR and East Germany versus how talking about the different freedoms we have in the United States. Just kind of giving a nice, well-rounded history lesson about women's rights in socialist states. I think I like this book, and I started reading it like a couple of years ago whenever I was like first declaring myself as like leftist and like wanting to learn that. And I think if I would have finished it then, it would have been a lot more helpful, because now I feel like I've read so many other different things where I kind of knew a lot of the stuff that was already mentioned in this. But I do think that this is a great primer read and a great first read if you don't know a lot about that stuff, because I do think it's a really accessible read and it's very well written. It is like, I'd say you need to be very early on in like your Marxist reading and like your left-wing reading before, if you need to read this. If you feel like you're well-rounded, then maybe you can skip this and just read whatever you normally read. But this one is very good and very educational, and it might change a bit of your perspective on some other societies. The next book I read was Blood Over Whitehaven by Emma Wong. Basically, Sayona is the first woman to ever be accepted in this prestigious, like, magical grad school, basically. No woman has ever been allowed to be let in. And basically, her colleagues kind of automatically make a joke of her because they're so sexist. Her colleagues end up making her assistant the janitor, which is another, like, oppressed group of people that live within the society. They end up discovering some mysteries about the way that their society is actually functioning. I enjoyed this at first whenever I read it, but, like, this book is really heavy, actually. What the hell? I enjoyed this more whenever I first read it, but then, like, the more that I think about it, the less that I like it. Where a lot of people were comparing this to Babel, and like, yes, but also no. Because I didn't like Sayona very much as her character, which obviously she's intentionally meant to be disliked. And I would say I still like this, I just don't think it's like necessarily life-changing for me in a lot of ways. I do think it has some great critiques of gender roles within society and like racism, but I think with Sayona's character, obviously she's intentionally like problematic. I do think that it still makes it incredibly hard to root for, because her growth is not done throughout the book. It is done on the side, which kind of frustrated me, because I wish I could have seen, because you're getting her perspective all throughout this pretty much, and like it's third person limited where it's mostly following Sayona, except for whenever it's not following her for like just a smidge. And I think, honestly, I think if it was from the other main characters, Tamil's point of view, I would have enjoyed this more. It would have been like a perfect 5-star read. But I do think that this is no Babel, but it's still pretty good. But it's just not perfect. Ugh, this book is, like, genuinely, why is it so heavy? The next book I read was The Bookshop, A History of the American Bookstore by Evan Friss. This is literally, the title tells you exactly the synopsis of this book. It's a nonfiction book about the history of bookshops, bookstores, and then it kind of discusses Amazon and how they're kind of ruining physical shopping of books because of the way that they undercut books specifically, and talking about big box retailers taking over like the book sphere. I think if you're a big reader and you see no issue with like choosing to read Amazon or Target books or Walmart books, maybe you should give this a little bit of a read. I do think it's very informative. I think you do learn a lot. I think it was interesting to learn about the retail aspect of it, especially as someone, obviously, as you can tell, who owns a lot of physical copies of books that I read. I think, depending on what you look for in a nonfiction, this book can be very informative. I liked it. I wouldn't say it's, like, again, life-changing or anything, but I do think if you're, like, a big reader and you want to know, like, a little bit more about, like, a history of something that I don't feel like gets discussed a lot, it could be a nice, like, relaxing read. The next book I read was The Dungeons and Anarchists. I'm not taking them out anymore. You know what? I'm literally done with that. The Dungeons and Anarchists Cookbook. Love this book. Again, recommend it. We did a review on the podcast. Pick it up. Read it right now. Like, if you have not read Carl, what are you doing with your life? The next book I read was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a memoir told vignette style about the author's abusive relationship in life. But that's genuinely all it is. It's, again, it kind of reminds me of Shark Heart in the way that the formatting is and stuff. It's very unique. I thought this was a very important queer read to do about queer women in traumatic relationships and abusive relationships, because that is not something that is discussed a lot in society. I think the writing style is very unique, and this is definitely an account that I think queer people and people in queer spaces definitely should look at. I think nobody is above critique or reflection, no matter what you identify as. And with the narrative perspective being second person, it is a very unique read where it's really placing you in the shoes of the author, where you can directly feel that abuse, and you gain that empathy that obviously some people don't have, because that's what reading does. It helps to build empathy, but it really does, I think, add that extra layer and perspective. I would say more than likely, yes, read it. Yes, read it. That's all I will say. Yes, read it. I think you should read it. It's very important. And honestly, it's not super long, and it's really easy. I honestly appreciated... I remember I was reading this in a book slump, and I think it really helped because a lot of the pages are just like that, and so you really felt like you were able to fly through it very quickly. Next up, we have I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This book is about 39 women who live in an imprisoned bunker with no reason to how or why they got there. Who put them there, what time it is even, they don't know nothing. There's one child among these women till something happens. Ooh. I don't want to say what happens because, again, I don't want to spoil it. I'm trying to be intentionally vague. I thought the premise was really interesting, but I think the plot less focus and the mystery was kind of lackluster. This book is a lot more, again, philosophical and introspective, and I don't like that in my fiction books. I want it to be very plot focused and a lot of stuff going on. I think this book can be okay or good for you, even if you like being left with your own questions that will never get resolved. Not me though, personally. So this is kind of my hot take, where I wouldn't say no, but I also wouldn't say yes. Maybe I would only recommend this to a certain group of people. If you're like me, probably not, just because it's not so plot-focused and plot-centered that I personally like. But I do think there are definitely some important aspects that can be withdrawn from here, and you can look at and reflect on yourself. The next book I read was The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This is following a young woman. She just discovered her great-grandfather's diary, and she's reading it for the first time. So you're getting a Lutheran priest's perspective while also getting a confession from a Native American that's just shown up from his church named Goodstab, who is giving his confession, telling him that he's a vampire and all of the sins that he has done in his life, basically, in his life story. I think the beginning of this book, it takes a second to get used to the writing style, but I'm telling you, once you get past those first 30 pages, you will love this. This book is so good. It is a horror novel, so it is pretty graphic in that way. The pastor's chapters are the slowest for me because half the time he's just talking about food and how hungry he is. Besides, and the other aspects, Goodstab chapters, I think about all the time. I think it's got great commentary surrounding settler colonialism, and it feels almost like a horror literary fiction. So if you're looking for more of that, I would say that's kind of the realm this is in. I do think everyone should read this, and I did read this with my book club, and there's a full review over on my podcast. The next book I read was Check-In Mate by Ali Hazelwood. This is a YA romance following Mallory, who quit chess years before for a mysterious reason, somehow relating to the death of her father. For her fundraiser, Mallory is forced to compete against the highest ranking chess champion in the whole world, and she ends up beating him. Wanting to avoid the fame and the limelight, the number one chess player ends up becoming very intrigued with Mallory. I don't know. It's a romance. What do you expect? I don't want to spoil it, but I feel like it's a romance. You know what's going to happen. Look at the cover. I think it's fine. Again, this is kind of my year on hating Ali Hazelwood. I DNF'd one other book of hers earlier this year. I don't remember exactly why I picked this up. It was fine for what it is. It's a romance, and I don't know. It's just, it wasn't life-changing to me. It was cute, yeah, but that's it. And it's got a little bit more than I think a typical YA novel would have, specifically in the romance aspect, but it was fine for what it was. It was fine. The next book I read was Normal People by Sally Rooney. In this book, you follow Connell and Mary Ann and their trials and tribulations of their friendship, relationships, and more. Connell is a deeply anxious man with mental health issues. Marianne is very clearly written to be neurodivergent. This book is advertised as a romance novel. It's not quite a romance, but it is a love story in a way, similar to like Shark Heart is. I'm very in between on this book. I thought it was interesting. Sally Rooney, I think, does a wonderful job at writing character-focused novels, and I think that this is very great, and this shows that, like, love does not conquer all. Love will not fix everything, blah, blah, blah. But it does have some great politics. The politics shine through in a very natural way. I find Marianne and Connell to be two incredibly frustrating characters, which I think is intentional, but sometimes very frustrating to read through. It makes sense why it is, it's just not what I personally prefer. I found the ending incredibly unsatisfying personally. I understand why it happens, but it doesn't mean I have to like love it. I did watch the TV show adaptation with my boyfriend. He loved the TV show. Honestly, he should have read the book because I think he would have loved the book. I do think the TV show is a very accurate adaptation, and we did a full review of this book over on the podcast. The next book I read was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Honestly, this is another book that's similar to Project Hail Mary in that way where I don't want to tell you anything at all. Just like go into this book as completely blind as possible. But so basically you're just following a dude who, I don't know, I don't want to say anything. Basically this dude gets kidnapped and then he wakes up in a world that isn't his own. That's all I'll say, because it's really, honestly, such a good book. I really enjoyed this. It was been on my TBR forever. My partner read it and he was like, you need to read this. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll read it. And I think this book is a love story in a way too, as well, where it's actually like got so much more plot going on within that. It's honestly so sweet. I really do love this book. It's honestly, like, I'm glad my partner maybe read it, and we really enjoyed it together. We talked about it together. And then we were going to watch the Apple TV. This is putting this ugly-ass sticker on this fucking book. And I watched the first episode of this fucking TV show, and it's... Why did they do that? And I'm pretty sure Blake Crouch has, like, the rights for the TV show. He ruined his own story. I could go on forever about how bad the TV show is. If you watch the TV show, I only watched the first episode, so obviously I don't know, but he ruined it. This book is so good, and he ruined his own adaptation. It makes me sick. It makes me sick. The next book I read was another Carl book, Gate of the Feral Gods. Again, read these. Read them! Read them! Read them! I will tell you that every time. I'm going to bring up every single one that I read and then just tell you to read them because that's all I can say about them. Literally read them. I really liked Gate of the Feral Gods. It wasn't my favorite, but it was still good. The next book I read was Walking Practice by Doki Min. This is basically all it's about is an alien crash landed on Earth, and the only way for their survival is to shapeshift into different humans and then have sex with them and then eat them. That's it. It's a translated novel from Korean, which is interesting. I do think the translation was done fine. There was a translation note at the end, I think, where some certain aspects aren't able to be clearly translated from Korean to English, so I'm sure I maybe would have enjoyed this more if I was reading it directly from Korean, if I understood that. I thought some of the things that it had to say about like gender and sexuality were very insightful, and I liked those aspects of it. But this book is, one, very short. It's only like, it's less than 150 pages, but then in those 150 pages, it ends up being very repetitive, where I think instead of a novella, this literally should have just been like a short story. Like literally just one book, like literally like 50 pages max is all I think it needed, and it could have done that. It is splatterpunky, so if you like that, it's pretty graphic in a lot of aspects, but I did read this with my book club, and we did a full review on the podcast for it. The next book I read was Catabasis by R. Huang. Dang, this is another freaking heavy book. Is it sprayed edges? Do they like add freaking like 10 pounds to your book? Jesus. But this book is just following Alice and Peter, who are academic rivals, and they must navigate the underworld to bring back their teacher for their letter of recommendation. This book was very divisive on Book Talk, with a lot of ARC readers DNFing it and middling reviews now that it's been out. I like this book. I don't think it's groundbreaking R.F. Kuang, and I don't think it's even the best R.F. Kuang book. That's Babel. I thought this was a disappointment compared to Babel, but it's not horrible even. I think if you like House of Hades by Rick Riordan, the fifth book in the Heroes of Olympus series. You would really love this, but this is kind of like the adult version of that, but I think House of Azes is better. But we did do a full book review of this on the podcast. The next book I read was The Butcher and Masquerade by Matt Dillman. Love this book. Again, read it. Did a full episode review, spoiler review on the podcast if you want to check that out. The next book I read, I don't actually have the copy right now because I'm loaning it out to my grandmother. Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is quite literally the scariest dystopian you will ever read in your life because it's about a global climate crisis in the year of our Lord, 2020. It takes place, I think, from like the 2020s to about like a little bit after like 2025-ish, so it's like modern day. It's very unsettling with how realistic it is. It talks about like unrestricted capitalism wreaking havoc across the US, and we follow Lauren in her quest to survive through the hardships of the world. I think even though this book was originally published in the 90s, it's honestly pretty crazy that this book is so accurate in the way that it is. I don't think Octavia Butler was a prophet, but she definitely was able to see what unregulated capitalism will do to society, which obviously we're not quite at the aspect of this book yet, but it feels incredibly more realistic every day that we live under this society. It has great social commentary that makes you realize that the problems that we have now will always be here within this system that we live in. I think the dystopian aspect is really great. It's got a lot to say about society, and I think it does a great job to show the passiveness in this world and society and what it does. We did a full review of this over on my podcast. The next book I read was Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher. Stephen, he's a disgraced paladin due to the death of his god years before, and his only reason of survival is to repay the debts that he is owed. All of that changes, though, whenever he meets Grace, who is a perfumer who is somehow becomes involved in an assassination gone wrong. This book is cute for what it is. This is my first T. Kingfisher novel. I think it's more of a romance than it is a murder mystery, which is kind of what I was expecting. I think the A plot is the romance, the B plot is this murder mystery aspect that you're kind of getting. I don't think the B plot is very good. It's kind of lackluster. I like the characters. I think T. Kingfisher does a very good job at writing very charming, sweet characters that you end up liking. Even though it's like a murder, this is like the coziest mystery I think I would ever read, which is not super cozy in a way because like T. Kingfisher is also like a horror novelist, so it is a little graphic in that aspect if you only read romances. But I think it does a good job at like playing with the balances of like being very heavy while also being lighthearted. I did enjoy this. It was cute. I think it's a good palate cleanser book if you're looking for that in between. The next book I read was Filter World, How Algorithms Flatten Culture. But this is just a nonfiction book discussing all the ways that media we consume now is determined by algorithms and rather than interpersonal relationships. How that used to give meaning to what we consumed, where it wasn't just like, oh, TikTok showed you this video because this video is gaining a lot of views and that's how like you hear about this. It was a lot more through individual people, and I thought it was a very interesting read. It's a very matter-of-fact, like very like straight to the point book. There's no fluff within this. I think the content within this is very important, especially if you use the internet pretty regularly, post on the internet pretty regularly. There's a whole section about book talk, which is pretty crazy. I prefer narrative nonfiction typically whenever I'm reading, and this one just wasn't that. But it was very educational, so if you're looking for that, I do recommend that. But I think if you're on the internet pretty regularly, you should read it. The next book I ended up reading was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is following 4 people that begin staying in a rumored haunted house. Dr. Montague is the lead investigator and scholar trying to figure out whether or not ghosts are real. We have Theodora, who has ties to the occult. Luke, who is going to be the next owner of Hill House. His aunt owns it, I think. And then we have Eleanor, who has no friends. Her mom just died, and she's kind of emo about it, and also her sister hates her. All that are in this maze-like, ghost-filled house. I didn't watch the show, first of all. I watched the first episode of the show, and after I read the book, and that's literally nothing like this, which I've heard the show gets better. Okay, maybe it does. Haven't gotten there. Instead of a spooky fest I thought I was gonna get, I got a snooze fest. Quite literally, I almost fell asleep reading this book multiple times. This novel is a classic. It feels like a classic. I don't think go into this expecting horror or frights or anything like that. You will not get that. This is a much more character-focused novel. And I think the queer themes that were within this, if those were explored way more, I think I would have enjoyed this a lot more because Eleanor and Theodora, hello. Theodora and her roommate, hello. Like, why wasn't that getting discussed in this? I think that could have been a much better thing within this. I know people love the show, but I didn't like the first episode of the show. I watched it months ago and never picked it up again. I don't even think this book is that worth a read, but we did do a full spoiler review over on the podcast. The next book I read was Eternal Rotten Romance by C.M. Guidros. This is a short story following the last known survivor of a zombie outbreak desperately searching for a cure. And maybe she finds one? I think with this book, sometimes just because you think something doesn't mean you need to announce it for the world to hear. From the title, Eternal Rotten Romance, it's about the female main character who ends up falling in love with the zombie, but not zombie. Imagine like warm bodies, but actually disgusting. I think the problem with this book is that it says it's called Eternal Rotten Romance. Is the romance in the room with us? There's literally no build up to the romance, and all of it gets yada-yada'd out where it's like time passes. If you're gonna claim to have romance in your title, I expect to see some of that romance on page, buddy. Like, yeah, we get the relations on page, but I don't want the relations. I want the buildup of the relationship. That's what I want in this world. But yeah, I think it's kind of boring. It's pretty graphic and gross if that's what you're looking for. It could be a nice, quick Halloween read. I think you can tell what month I'm in with based on what I'm reading around this time. I think it's disgusting, and it does give you that disgusting aspect, which is what you want. If that's what you want, that's all you'll get, to be honest. The next book I read was The Art Thief by Michael Finkel. This book follows Stefan Breitweiser. Don't know how to say his name. He's French, I think. Sorry. But he's a man responsible for over 200 art heists within 8 years. This book genuinely feels like a BuzzFeed Unsolved episode. If you're like me and you love Unsolved, you love The Watcher, you will love this book. It's a story about love and obsession with art, but also his assistant sidekick and the people that surround it. I don't want to spoil this. This is another one of those, like, this is a non-fiction book that genuinely feels fiction. And I couldn't put it down. It was incredibly engrossing, and it's very much worth the read. Very, very good. Very much enjoyed. The next book I read was The Spirit That Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White. This takes place in 1800s London. Silas, who's a trans teen boy who has the coveted violet eyes that only certain people have within the society, and they have these eyes, and they basically have the power to, like, see ghosts and things like that. But because he has violet eyes and he is trans, his parents are trying to force him into an arranged marriage that he does not want to participate in. But then he tries to escape, ends up getting caught, and then locked up into this finishing school for girls with harsh instructors. He then investigates what's going on. I think this book is a very beautifully written. I feel like Andrew Joseph White, that I cannot wait to read more of his work because this book was amazing. I think it has not only great queer representation, also has great autistic representation, where Silas is also autistic, and it is portrayed so well and so clearly, and I'm literally like, you're just like me for real, which is so great, and I love that it feels genuine rather than just like thrown in for like funsies or whatever, which some of these other books that I've read have done. It is a horror novel, and it is YA, so even though it's YA, the horror is a little bit more extreme, I would say, than your typical YA book, but it's also not splatterpunk-esque. I do think it's very good. I'd recommend this to most young people, to be honest. High school age, it's perfect for, but even older than high school, I think you can still really enjoy it. It's got a very great story along with it. The next book I read was The Eye of the Bedlam Bride by Matt Dinniman. This was my favorite Carl book, which is kind of unpopular, I think. I don't think people like this one. I'm considering Doomsday Scenario is also one of my favorites, and everyone hates that one too. Which, like, when I say hate, I mean, like, the average is 4.5 rather than 4.6 or something. Like, these are all very closely rated books. But The Eye of the Bedlam Bride, I loved everything about it. Perfect book. I loved it. Couldn't put it down. Love you, Carl. Love you, Donut. That's my family. And we did a full review of this over on my podcast. The next book I read was Elite Capture: How the Powerful took over identity politics. This is a nonfiction novel discussing the history of identity politics, how it has been co-opted by politicians and Democrats and Republicans and elites, and how it's now causing harms and rifts between true mass cooperations of different marginalized communities. I think this book is really good. It is such a short read. The audiobook is literally like 3 hours, so you put that in 1.5, 2 times speed, you'll be done with that in like less than 2 hours. Like, I'm telling you, it's shorter than a movie. Like, it's so fast. It's incredibly informative, and definitely something I think every liberal specifically should read, and I think it does a great job at discussing how we should not just blindly support someone just because of their identity, but how they actually support and help the oppressed class. The next book I read was 3 Days, 9 Months, 27 Years by John Scalzi. This is a part of the Amazon short story collection called The Time Traveler's Passport. In this short story, you're following a character who's the controller of a mechanism that's able to send people back in time to whatever time they choose. It's a very short read. I'm telling you, it's like 40 pages maybe. I'd say if you like science fiction, I'd recommend it. It's pretty good. I never read John Scalzi's work before, and I wanted to try out his book before I read any of his books, and I think I will definitely be reading Starter Villain at some point, because I did really like this novel, or this short story. I thought it was I kind of wish this was actually a novel rather than just a short story, but it was funny, it's cute, it's got a nice little class discussion on it that isn't super strong, but I thought it was good. The next book I read was The Unworthy by Augustia Betserica. This is a young woman who is recruited into a cult and following an extreme climate crisis. And sharing your experience is punishable by death within this cult. But this one unworthy keeps a diary, and that's what we're reading. To be honest, I feel like there's not a lot going on in this novel. It's an interesting plot, I think, with not a lot of payoff. I read Tender as the Flesh by the same author last year, the year before, and I did not like that book. I did not like this one. I think, again, this is another introspective novel where, like, you're kind of roped into this big plot, and then it's not really, like, plot. I didn't enjoy it, and I don't know if we read this for the book club. Maybe we read this for the book club? Don't remember. Oops, sorry. But we did do a full review of this on the podcast where I talk about my full spoiler reviews. But yeah, this one just wasn't for me. The next book I read was Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. This is following the true and horrifying event, the 1996 climb on Mount Everest. This book is really heavy. I think it's a really interesting personal account to what has specifically happened on this expedition. I think this is a great argument to why nobody should ever climb out Mount Everest and, like, why were we even doing that in the first place. I do think that I wish this went into more of the discussion of the exploited Sherpas. It does a little bit, but not quite as much as what I would have personally liked. But I do think this is a very interesting read, and you do learn a lot. And it also is narrative nonfiction. So I do think that is a little bit, makes it feel almost more like a fictional read while not being fictional. The next book I read was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This book is a collection of essays ranging from air conditioners to teddy bears, while also being part memoir. I had been in the trenches for John Green in high school a week before my freshman year. Or not even, I think like the day before freshman year, like The Fault in Our Stars had come out, and I was obsessed. I was ready to get my hands on it, and I read it, and then I have subsequently read most of John Green's other teen fiction novels whenever I was a teenager, and this one was the first one that I picked up. This is not the first one that I picked up as an adult. I read Turtles All the Way Down a couple of years ago. That one was fine. But this is his first nonfiction that I ended up picking up, and I love this. I adored this book. I think this is probably his best novel. No offense to Fault in Our Stars or Paper Towns. Whenever I was a teenager, I'll probably kill myself for saying that. But I think this has some great insights, some profound essays. It's very touching. This is one of those books that I feel like after every essay, I was just like sitting there with my thoughts like, dang. You know, just like, God. And some of them even like made me tear up. Like, they're so reflective. And I think the essays are so fun and also really informative. I really enjoyed them, and I really love this. Like, I think everyone should read this. Okay, the next book I read was the final Curl book, The Inevitable Ruin by Matt Denman. Again, yes, this is a great book so far. The next one is not out until May, which I will be crawling on my hands and knees to be getting that as soon as it comes out. I will be picking it up. But yeah, I'm very excited for it. This is a great book to leave off on. It's Matt Denman cooks every single book. I'm telling you, all of them cook. The next book I read was The Will of the Many by James Islington. This is actually a reread. I read it for the first time last year, but the sequel was coming out this year, so I ended up rereading this. And if you don't know anything about this, you're following an orphan named Viz who gets adopted by a mysterious, powerful senator who then is sending Viz to an academy that only like children of senators are able to go to, and he's forced to solve a murder. Or not a murder? Don't know. Again, I don't want to say too much about this. I love this book. This was I think if it wasn't my favorite read of last year, it was in my top 3 of last year for sure. I loved this book. I think it's equally mysterious, dark. It's got great fantasy in it. I had my partner read it this year. He loved it. He adored it. And I strongly recommend this series. I will talk about the second one here in a bit, but I did really enjoy this, especially like whenever I finished it. This one's heavy too. I think sprayed edges must add like an extra 3 pounds to a book or something, dude. But yes, Will of the Many, love. The next book I read was Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. On their 5th year of marriage, Nick's wife is suddenly and suspiciously missing. From a staged crime scene to Nick smiling at the press conference, what happened to Amy? That's what you're following. I never read this book or watched the movie, so I just decided to do that this year. Don't know why, what took over me. But I'm surprised that I feel like the book is kind of overhyped. I do think the movie was actually better. Again, interesting development. But maybe because of like the relevance of it within pop culture, I kind of like already knew like the twist. Not that I necessarily like read it or consumed anything about it before. It's just so like ingrained in popular culture. I feel like it's kind of obvious whatever it is. But it was okay for what it was. It was fine. I think honestly, it'd be worth watching the movie rather than reading the book. It is a very accurate adaptation as well. There's not very many things that are cut out of this. The next book I read was Strength of the Few by James Islington. Obviously, yes, I just ranted and raved about The Will of the Many. This is, again, I think this is an adequate sequel to the Will of the Many. I don't understand people that are DNFing or hating on this. This one's better. I wouldn't say better. I'd say they're about equal footing, but I did really enjoy this. The book I read was They Both Die at the End by Adam Silver. My camera is overheating and I'm running out of time, so I really do have to rush this. Sorry. But you're following Rufus and Mateo, who have both gotten an alert warning that their imminent death is within the next 24 hours, and so you're following them as they step out of their comfort zone to live their last day. This book is cute for what it is. I kind of wish there was more world-building aspects, because it kind of just takes place in New York, and we're just in New York. It's cute, and I liked the plot aspects. It's just not a perfect book, but I do think probably yes, but probably not, because it's not necessarily life-altering or changing. It's good, though. The next book I read was another short story, Making Space by R. Kwong. Again, this is another book, a part of the time traveler's passport thing. In the story, you follow a woman who ends up finding an abandoned child. I didn't love this book. I thought the commentary was pretty good though, however. But with it being a short story, it didn't delve as deep as what I would have enjoyed into different things, considering it was only 30 pages. And also it was kind of predictable, which I mean, it's a short story. It's not necessarily like crazy or anything, but it is what it is. The next book I read was After the Revolution by Robert Evans. This is following 3 separate perspectives after a failed Marxist, I think it's a Marxist revolution. I don't think it's ever clearly stated. We have the anarchist paradise. We have the heavenly kingdom, which is like Christo-fascism. That's pretty much it. But I hated this book. It was really boring. It was genuinely a snooze fest. I think this book is full of telling you what's going on rather than showing you what's going on. And I did read this book with my book club, and we did do a full podcast review over on Literary Liberation. The next book I read was Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. This is a nonfiction book about the history of tuberculosis. I enjoyed this book. I do think it could have gone a lot deeper into more critiques of capitalism and like Johnson & Johnson, but I do think this does have great information. It is a great primer to the inequalities of healthcare throughout the world. It's not super well-rounded. I do think some of the aspects are interesting and some of them are a little bit like blah, 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 but I did like this, and I do think if you like John Green's work, you will like this, and I do think it was very educational. Like, again, but it's a primer. It's not the end-all be-all. I think this is something that you could start with, and there's more you should read throughout. The next book I read was Snake Eater by T. Kingfisher. This is following Selena as she moves to a new town right after her mother has died, and she's recently left her partner of multiple years, but also the town is mysteriously magical? I don't know. I don't really know how to describe this book. I think I went to like it more than what I did. It's cute for what it is. It's giving Stardew Valley vibes. It is another cozy book, which I think I did like Paladin's Grace more than I liked Snake Eater, but I do think it's weird. This book is classified as horror. Is the horror in the room with us? It's not super horror to me personally, but it is horror, I guess. Like, I don't know what else you want me to say. It's fine. It's cute. It's fine. Not life-changing. The next book I read was Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. This is the second Murderbot book. I really did enjoy this. It's cute. I liked it a little bit more than the first one, actually, and I think that's just because I've gotten more used to Murderbot's character. But love this. My camera is about to die, so I really am rushing through this. I'm so sorry. The next book I read was Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. This is the second book in the Parable of the Sower of the Earthseed duology. Very good. I think the second one is way better than the first one. Again, recommend it. It's kind of following the same thing, but a couple years more in the future, and it's a little bit more in depth, I would say. But I do think it is very good. The next book I read was Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. You're following a disgraced knight, a shunned priest, and a little girl with the ability to talk to God and angels? We don't know. As they go on quests to kind of like kill demons. It's set during like the Prime Plague, like 1300s-esque. This is probably my hottest take. I freaking hated this book. I did not enjoy this. I think it's incredibly overhyped. It tries to be funny. It's not funny. This book is like 90% dialogue the whole time, which, like, okay, it's all vibes, no plot. The plot is there, but, like, I don't care. The ending is so lame. Like, I will definitely be talking about this more in my top 10 worst books, which, like, it's gonna be such a hot take that I hated this. Sorry, but, like, and my partner really liked it, and my best friend really liked it, so I think I'm allowed to be a hater for this because everybody I know loved it, and it's just like, thank you for wasting my time. The next book I read was The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. Basically, every 24 years, an emperor steps down and trials are done to compete for the next emperor, and you're following this particular year's trial while the main character is also solving a murder of one of the contenders. This book was kind of incredibly overhyped. It's fine for what it is. I don't necessarily think it's life-changing. I liked it more whenever I first read it, but then, like, sitting on it, I like it less. I did read this with my book club, and I just think it's weird that this book is, like, a political fantasy. First off, the fantasy isn't super fantasy. It's more in the realm of, like, gods, and it's not super magically. But then also, it's a political book with no political commentary, really. Like, it's just, like, vying for the throne politically, and I just feel like if you're gonna be a political book, you should have some more to say, personally. But it's fine. I thought the ending was really intriguing, and I have high hopes for the series, but again, I won't hold my breath if the second one's not very good. But I don't know. I wanted to like this so much more than I did. Like, it's so hyped, and I'm just like, oh, okay. The next book I read was Still Life with Bones, Genocide, Forensics, and What Remains by Alexa Haggerty. Alexa Haggerty is an anthropologist who primarily works in Latin America and a few different countries, and you get the histories of dictatorships and through a memoir kind of style of work. I thought this book was very informative. I learned a lot reading it. I listened through the audiobook, and I don't think I gelled with the audiobook narrator personally, which is maybe why I didn't like it as much. And I feel like physically reading this is kind of the way to go because it's so, like, information heavy. But I think I would have, like, been more receptive to all the information if I was physically reading this. But it is very good. I did learn a lot. Very informative. The next book I read was Medicine River, A Story of Survival and Legacy of the Indian Boarding Schools by Mary Annette Pember. This is another book where you're getting history through a memoir but you're getting the history of the indigenous boarding schools that were funded by the U.S. and Canadian governments and also the Catholic Church, which we don't have a lot of history on. There's not a lot of nonfiction written about this because, like, the documents and stuff are so hidden from this because they wanted to hide the horrors they did to these people and these children because they're deeply evil. But I think the memoir aspect of this is done really well, and I also do think, like, through the informative aspects of it is done really well because you're kind of getting Mary Annette Pember's perspective and her traumatic and troubling relationship she had with her mother because her mother was a student at one of these schools. And I think it is incredibly well done, really well researched, and I think it does a great job at focusing on religious and generational trauma that is spread throughout the world. The final book I read, thank God, I'm tired of dogging. My camera's literally about to die. I read The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. This is set in a fantasy where you follow a young group of girls who can read dangerous omens when the king comes to get his fortune read, basically. I don't want to spoil it. I like this book. It's cute. My partner read it. He really loved it. I think Rachel Gillig's other series is better. I mean, I haven't read the second one, but at least the first book is better than this first book. This one's fine. It's very cute. But I did enjoy it. And I think the characters is the strong aspect of this. I didn't like the plot as much. But with that is everything I read. There goes the tower. With that is everything I read in 2025. Described to ya. And whether or not you should read it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video.